You probably don't know the name Thomas Savery, but you really should, for all of us, owe him a debt that is rather beyond imagining, or at least all of us who value living in an industrialized technological society, so I guess the climate cult loonies are out. But why do we owe Thomas Savery such an inestimable debt of gratitude? Because he was the man 346 years ago today on the 2nd of July, 1698, who patented history's very first commercial steam engine, which he named, not very poetically, a new invention for raising of water and occasioning motion to all sorts of mill work by the impelment force of fire, which will be of great use and advantage for draining mines, serving towns with water, and for the working of all sorts of mills where they have not the benefit of water nor constant winds. Mr. Savery's contraption, which came to be known, unsurprisingly, as the Savery engine, was about as rudimentary as can be. It featured no moving parts save for an intake valve and an outlet valve, but the principle behind it is the same principle we're still using 3.5 centuries later to drive our nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and ballistic missile submarines. Put water in a boiler, apply heat from a sustained chemical reaction, the water turns to steam, you pressurize the steam, and it performs the work. And sure, it's easy with historical hindsight to accuse Mr. Savery of being insufficiently imaginative and not fully appreciative of the potential implications of the machine he had created. But in the times in which he was living, engineers had spent many, many centuries trying to devise a way to move water from one place to another without the aid of gravity. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon were not one of the ancient wonders of the world because the plants were pretty. They were one of the wonders of the ancient world because the engineering achievement of getting that much water from ground level all the way up to 60, 70, 80 feet off the ground. And we're still not entirely sure how they pulled it off. Probably it was some combination of Archimedean screws and lots of slaves carrying lots of buckets 24 hours a day. But for thousands of years, from ancient Greece all the way up to Thomas Savery in 1698, the Archimedean screw was really the only practicable way of moving water uphill. And the only way of having pressurized indoor plumbing was through water towers and thus gravity. And even as wondrous an achievement as the Archimedean screw was and is, it still relies on men or animals turning a capstan in order for it to work. But with the Savery engine, that is the first time you can perform that same work just by lighting a fire and walking away. As long as you keep the fire supplied with fuel and the boiler supplied with water, the machine does all the work for you. So it's understandable that Mr. Savery was only thinking in terms of solving one or two specific problems, because they were problems that had been vexing humanity's finest minds for thousands of years. In the actual event, well, the machine wound up having certain design limitations that rendered it unfit for purpose as far as the dewatering of mine shafts. The soldering technology of the day just didn't provide the possibility of making a sound enough pressure vessel that it could hold the steam at sufficient pressure to move that much water that far in a vertical direction. But as far as providing a reliable pressurized indoor water supply to a building or a group of buildings without the need for any water towers, even in its most rudimentary and imperfect form, it wound up being pretty good at that. Hampton Court Palace became the first building in the world with pressurized indoor plumbing when Mr. Savery installed one of his engines there, and the system kept working for nearly 20 years before it needed to be upgraded. This man could not have had any possible idea that within scarcely a century, the descendants of his machine would enable railroads to crisscross the length and breadth of Great Britain. And within 2 centuries, further refinements of his technology would give birth to the age of steamships, would enable the settlement of previously inaccessible parts of the planet, would turn a transatlantic sea voyage from a terrifying 5-month-long ordeal into a pleasant 5-day luxury excursion. Just don't run into any icebergs, obviously. And how could he know any of that? This guy just thought he had a good idea to make life a little easier on coal miners, and he wound up not even accomplishing that goal. In all likelihood, when Thomas Savery perished in 1715 at the age of 65, he might have reckoned that nobody would ever remember him or his weird, esoteric little invention. But from our remove, as the people who live quite comfortably in the world that he did much to create, we can see that if he did indeed think like that, then he was being far too modest. And since he wasn't of sufficiently noble birth, he never received any lands or titles or knighthoods or any post-nominal letters to speak of. He wasn't even given membership in the Royal Society, even though he made a good number of well-received presentations there, which is a story that reminds one all too much of John Harrison, the inventor of the marine chronometer, which enabled ships to accurately track their longitude for the first time. He went similarly unhonored within his own lifetime due to being of unacceptably lowly birth, but his invention and Savery's invention 150 years apart, they are the two linchpins that opened up a world of safe, quick, reliable maritime transportation and commerce. Our world looks completely different, and not in a good way, without either of these gentlemen. And also, God bless fossil fuel. Gotta give fossil fuel a shout out, because that is the other indispensable component of the modern age of technology and convenience that we all like to take so for granted, whether any dumbass hippy dippy climate cultist wants to hear it or not.